everybody, welcome back. Today we are talking about YouTube versus a podcast and which one is right for your business. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome back to the Brazenist podcast. We're all about helping you build an online business, work less, earn more, travel often, and live your version of a brazen, audacious, and badass life. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts. It is amazing to hang out with you today. I'm very excited to talk about this topic because I was just on a coaching call with a client and we were diving deep into this together. I broke down a bunch of pros and cons of each for her, and I thought this would be some killer podcast YouTube content. So here we are, and I'm going to be sharing with you all the details of what my experience is doing both and some different variables and considerations you need to have if you're trying to decide between a YouTube channel and a podcast. If you're new around here and not even sure where to begin with this whole online business thing, I have got something for you. It's my 30-day online income roadmap. In this roadmap, I break down week by week, step by step, what you need to do in order to launch your online business in the next 30 days. You will not be a millionaire in 30 days, but you will have some money in your pocket. You're going to get a taste of that online income life, and it's going to put you in the right track to starting to build something, an asset that you own in the online arena. So if you want to get my step-by-step, no fluff guide on how to get started with this, even if you have no idea, no audience, no website, nada, then go download that. The link is in the description, and just go to brazenist.com/roadmap. Get out there, make some magic happen. All right, should you start a YouTube channel or a podcast? I have done both. Here's the answer you're not gonna love. It depends. Oh, I hate that answer. That's the worst answer in the world, but it really does depend on your niche, your industry, your talents and skills and strengths that you're gonna bring to either platform. So there's a lot of variables you need to consider, but we're just gonna think about them purely as you could do both. Like you have the skills and the talents to do both, and now which one is going to be the better driver for your business? Let's start with a podcast. Here's my background in podcasting. In 2016, I launched the Inside Study Abroad podcast for my company, Inside Study Abroad. In that time, we've gotten over 100,000 downloads. That's not a lot, but for my industry, it is a lot. So we're getting on an average about 1,500 to 2,000 downloads per episode on our podcast. So for my field, that's huge because there's not that many people in our field. So that's my background in podcasting. It's gone on and off over the years since 2016, but that's my primary content driver, my discovery driver for Inside Study Abroad is the podcast. For this brand, I'm focused more on the YouTube side of things with this channel, Brooke Roberts, and another channel for Brazenist, which I'll break down for you later after I give you the pros and cons of each. I'll tell you why I have this structure for Brazenist and for Inside Study Abroad. I'm going to break down why I chose these avenues and what we'll be doing moving forward based on some preliminary data that I've gotten so far. So let's just break down pros and cons of a podcast. The first thing about a podcast, why it's an amazing platform to go for, is because it's easy to get started. You just really have to focus on one element, and it's just the audio. So I could roll out of bed, pajamas, and not look good at all. And I would be able to just record a podcast. And that's the cool thing about a podcast. You could decide right now, I want to start a podcast. You could go to anchor.fm, which is the platform I recommend for everybody getting started because it's free and we love free. And you can record directly into the platform, publish right away, and you could have a podcast episode live in literally 10 minutes. It's that easy to get started with a podcast. With Anchor, then you set it up so it distributes that RSS feed, that podcast feed to Apple Podcasts, to Spotify, all the different places that you can listen to podcasts. It is amazing that you can get up and running with a content driver like a podcast and start sharing your message, adding value to your audience, showcasing your expertise and knowledge. You could be doing that right now, fast, super fast. That is probably the biggest pro of a podcast. The next one is that you only have to worry about audio. So it is important that you do have good audio quality, and that can be solved with a simple mic. I use the ATR 2100. I'll link to it down in the description box below. I've literally had this mic since 2015, I think. I carried it around the world with me as a digital nomad. This thing has been around the world and back again, and it's still going strong. It's a great mic. I think it was like $70. Like I already mentioned, you don't have to do your makeup. You don't have to get physically presentable in order to do a podcast, etc. With the lighting. You have to worry about a nice backdrop and set so that it looks professional, which is kind of important on YouTube. The other thing that's really great about a podcast is that long form content is not only acceptable on a podcast feed, but it's almost expected that you're going to have 30-minute, 45-minute, maybe an hour-long piece of content on a podcast feed. In conjunction with that, people are more likely to listen to more of your content on a podcast feed. They're more likely to listen to about 75% of an episode, which is great because that gives you more time with your listeners, more time with your audience, so that they're getting to know you and you're building a rapport, which was my next pro, is that with a podcast, you're literally in people's ears as they are going about their day. They might be on a run, they might be doing the dishes, they're on a long road trip. They could be listening to you share your knowledge, experience, skills, stories, funny jokes, whatever you got, and you're with them as they go through their life, which is an amazing thing to do if you're trying to build community, build an audience that really loves you and trusts you, and then hopefully wants to buy something from you. The last element that I think is the biggest pro of a podcast is that interviews are probably the best way to grow a podcast, and they're very much expected and accepted, again, on a podcast feed. So if you do a podcast and you incorporate an interview element to it where you're bringing other people, other thought leaders, other interesting folks onto your podcast feed, sharing their story, experience, expertise with your audience, then you're more likely to get discovered because the guest is more likely to tell their community and their audience, say, hey, go listen to my latest episode over on the whatever podcast. So they're more likely to share that because they are being featured. That's the primary driver in how you're going to grow a podcast, getting more people to know about the feed and hopefully subscribing and leaving a rating and review and all that stuff. And by the way, as I mentioned that, if you are listening to the podcast feed right now, give your girl a rating and review, please. 5 stars would be great. And tell me in the actual comment of your review what you think about the podcast and what you'd like to see more of or hear more of, I should say, in the podcast. So thank you so much. And now on to the cons of a podcast. While I mentioned that an interview element is very powerful in helping you get discovered for a podcast, at the same time, podcasts are still just hard to find. They're not very searchable, like all the different platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, which are the 2 biggest players. They aren't great at search, right? They just haven't got that algorithm thing down. So even if you're searching for a key term, it's really hard to find the right podcast, especially if you're on Google and you're searching for something. It's not indexing podcasts as well as video and written formats just yet, although that could change in the future. It's just a little bit harder to get discovered by a broader audience who's looking for the topic that you are sharing about. For Inside Study Abroad, most of the people that are discovering us are coming through, one, the interviews, or the interviewees rather, they are sharing it with their audience, and 2, it's getting referred by other people, which is great. If people can share the podcast, that's amazing, but you just have to have a very loyal, eager audience in order to get that kind of sharing virality with your podcast episodes. So it is just a lot harder to grow a podcast because it's a lot harder to get discovered. Now, while you don't have to worry about lighting or the visual of a podcast, you do still have to be good at audio, and you do have to get a decent audio setup and the editing phase, whether you're doing it yourself or you have to hire someone to edit, that it's balanced and you don't have weird spots where it's super loud and super low and all that crazy stuff. Audio engineering is not for the lazy. It does take a lot of time to edit a podcast, which is my next con. Because they typically are longer format, they often also just take longer to edit. And because it's just audio, people can get a little more annoyed with your little verbal tics. I know I have a lot of them. I'll say right and sort of, all those, and of course, all of those elements are things that can be grating to the ears if there's too much of it. And so when you're editing, it's really smart to edit out some of those things so it is a little more smooth and a little more pleasant when people are actually listening to the podcast. So if you have an hour-long podcast interview, it's going to take you several hours to edit that because it takes time to listen and edit and listen and edit, etc. So of course you can hire it out, but that costs money. But it is something that's really important. You have to have your audio quality on point. The last con I will say with podcasts, it's a lot harder to move your audience from a podcast while they're listening to your email list, for instance, because you know that that's a key driver in our online business. When somebody's listening and consuming your content on a podcast, like I mentioned, yes, they might be doing the dishes on a walk or they're commuting. It's less likely that they'll be in a situation where they want to go to your website and then download your 30-day online income roadmap, for instance. It's less likely people are going to click those links because they tend to be multitasking in a podcast feed. And because it's really important to grow your email list as an online business owner, that can be a downside of just doing a podcast. So those are my pros and cons of a podcast. Let's move on to YouTube as another key driver in your online business. Now, I'm a big fan of YouTube. I really like YouTube. I know I'm kind of an old person comparatively to the standard YouTube user. I use YouTube all the time. In fact, you probably do too. Most of us do. You know why I know that? Is because YouTube is the number 2 search engine in the world, owned by the number 1 search engine in the world, which is Google. And so even if you haven't gone to YouTube and searched, you've searched YouTube, because if you searched something like how to format my resume, it's likely that in your Google results, there were articles and links to websites, but at the top, there was also a few YouTube videos that they were recommending that you could go watch to learn about how to format your resume. We're all searching YouTube, even if you don't actually go to the YouTube platform, which means that if you are producing content on YouTube, the world is much more open to you in terms of your searchability and people being able to find you by just sheer putting in a key term. That is super powerful. And I'm going to go through other pros and other cons, of the YouTube verse, but that's probably the biggest thing. And it probably needs like 17 extra check marks next to the pro column, because that is a game changer in terms of growing your business. Because it's so much harder to get found on a podcast, it just takes longer to grow. And as a result, you're going to get fewer people on your email list, therefore fewer people going through your funnel, fewer people buying your product, etc. A YouTube channel is going to help you get in front of more people faster who are searching for the terms and phrases and topics related to your industry and your niche that you are sharing about. Another great part of YouTube, which I have discovered in the last year, is that once you hit a certain threshold on YouTube, you can join the YouTube Partner Program, which means you can run advertisements on your videos. You've probably seen them. There probably was an ad on this video if you're watching on YouTube. The benefit to you as the content creator is that once you hit 4,000 watch hours and 1,000 subscribers, you can then apply to the partner program and get accepted and start running ads. And as you grow your channel and get more views and engagement and subscribers, etc., you will then begin to get paid to create content on YouTube just through the ads alone. You could create a piece of content like I'm doing now that showcases your expertise, that gets people to know, like, and trust you, and you could actually be getting paid to just create that without them even buying anything from you directly. So that's really powerful to be able to get paid to basically create content marketing and advertising for your business. Most people are paying for advertising. On YouTube, you get paid to create the advertisements for your business. Obviously, this piece of content is not an advertisement. It's you sharing your knowledge, but it's a mechanism to bring people into your ecosystem, in your business, and hopefully into one of your paid products. Another benefit to YouTube, just like a podcast, is that you now get to build rapport, not only just with audio, but with a visual as well. I talk with my hands a lot and I make weird faces sometimes and I laugh. Sometimes those things I will edit out, little quirks and things like that in a podcast, because it just doesn't make sense and they have to listen to me laugh, and I'm not sure if that's like a good user experience. Whereas if it's visual, you get to see me laugh and you get to see me take the pauses and you get to see my hands going crazy because it's the Italian in me. That's part of the visual experience. Yeah, some people aren't going to like it for sure, but other people, it's going to endear them to me because they're going to get to know me and feel like they're actually sitting across the table from me, learning from me, like we're having a cup of coffee. Another part of YouTube that's really powerful is that when you can show something versus just verbalize it or explain something, that is way more powerful. A picture is worth 1,000 words. That is a big asset to video. While I'm talking about things, I could also put little screenshots on the screen and showcase exactly what I'm talking about. If I want to describe, what it's like to be a digital nomad in Lisbon, and I can have epic video of Lisbon and Portugal, and that is much more powerful than me trying to explain it and describe it in an audio format. Now, there are people who are really great at that for sure and can do it well on a podcast. I listen to a lot of travel podcasts, but when you have the tool of the visual for you with a YouTube channel, that can be even more powerful for your brand and your business and what you're trying to teach. Another pro to just doing YouTube videos is that you can focus more on shorter form content. The sweet spot that a lot of professional YouTubers talk about is around 12 and a half minutes is the ideal length of a video. Now, I break that rule every week, but that is the ideal length. And so therefore, you don't have to worry about making this long form piece of content. You can just focus on creating a really high value, shorter piece of content that people are going to actually watch. All right, let's get to the cons of a YouTube channel and a YouTube strategy is that there's just more to edit. You got to get a setting that is pleasing and not super distracting to your audience. It would be horrible if I had like a huge mess behind me. You need to get some good lighting. So I'm sitting in front of a big window. I've got another ring light over here. I have a really nice mic, although you would argue that this is not aesthetically the best choice. I should probably have a boom mic that's out of frame or a lapel mic that's even better, but I want that good audio quality for the podcast, so that's why I use this. There's just a lot more going on that you have to manage. I had to obviously get myself looking presentable, put on a little makeup, do my hair, put on a proper shirt. Although I love a t-shirt and jeans, totally how I roll. And then once I want to edit all this, I got to bring in the video file, I got to bring in the audio file, I got to do all the editing and just make it look good. And then if I want to add all those visual elements, I got to drop in B-roll and screenshots and other things I want to share to give that visual appeal as well. So there's just a lot more moving parts with a YouTube video, which can be very intimidating to people because they think that the production quality has to be super, super fancy. In the future, I'm going to do a breakdown behind the scenes of my entire YouTube setup and the cost of everything and how I do it all, from setting the stage literally to the editing process of like what that looks like. It's not as complicated as it might seem. Let me know in the comments if you want to see that video on my YouTube and podcast setup. The other thing with YouTube is because people expect shorter form videos and they're searching for an answer to their question, it's harder to keep their attention. So if somebody is looking for YouTube versus a podcast, which one should I do? This video is going to be longer than 12 minutes. For sure. I've already been recording for 22 minutes. I know that there's a lot of people who are going to be like, oh, that's too long. I just want the nuts and bolts in and out. I don't want your commentary. I don't want the personality. They just want the information. And so it's less likely they'll listen or watch this entire video when they just want a specific answer to their problem. Whereas with a podcast, if they're subscribed to your feed, they're likely going to listen to probably just about every episode that you put out just because it's in their feed and they're used to hearing your voice and want to engage and hear what you have to say about something. Just like a podcast, it is difficult to get people to move off of YouTube and onto your email list. I think it's easier on YouTube because you are getting found and discovered by more people faster than you are with a podcast. But just like any platform, it's very challenging to move people from the platform that they are on and where they are consuming content to move them to another platform. For instance, if somebody blew up big on YouTube, it's really hard for them to get people to follow them on Instagram, and vice versa. If somebody was big on Instagram and they decide to start a YouTube channel, it's often really challenging for them to get those people from Instagram to move over to YouTube because it's two different cultures. It's like comparing Portugal to Poland. It's totally different languages, totally different expectations, just different way of life and looking at the world. It's the same thing on different social media and content distribution platforms. You have to keep that in mind when you are talking to an audience on a particular platform because they're used to a certain format, certain language, a certain style. And if you try to take that style and plop it over somewhere else, it's less likely to engage those people because they're like, that's not what we do here. That's not how we behave. Crossing platforms is like crossing cultures. You got to be aware of what's going on in different platforms and what people expect. And the last con of YouTube, which really isn't a con, it's kind of just like a podcast, is that it feels saturated, but it's really not. More and more people are coming online. Yes, there are more YouTube channels than ever before, and there are definitely more YouTube channels than podcasts, but that doesn't mean there's not opportunity for you to make a name and grow a channel on YouTube around your niche and subject matter expertise. There are a lot of people talking about online business, for instance. A lot of people, a lot of very sketchy people, I would say, as well. And there's some really smart and wonderful people talking about it as well. I could have said, oh, there's plenty of people talking about that. Why would I throw my hat in that ring? I decided that no, I have a very distinct experience that's unique. I've built an online business that's not in the online business arena. I built it in a small industry and I'm still very successful. And I want to show other people that they can also build a successful business that's not in a highly popular, well-known niche like health and fitness or building a business. But it's still possible to build a thriving business in niches that are and industries that are not that popular. And I am a great example of that with Inside Study Abroad. And it's not just study abroad, it's careers in study abroad, which is hyper niche. So let's get into the structure of our content strategy for Inside Study Abroad and here at this channel and with Brazenist. And let me break down to you sort of our structure and why I made the decisions to do it the way we're doing it. Inside Study Abroad started off technically as a blog, and then I started posting video interviews, and that's the only reason we had a YouTube channel is I just needed a place to host the video so I could embed them in the blog. And then later on, I moved to a purely podcast format. So there were no more YouTube videos. I was just posting interviews to the podcast and then embedding those interviews in blog posts on our website. In the last year, I decided I want to try out this YouTube thing. I knew how powerful YouTube could be for search. So I decided, how about we take the video and edit it all at the same time so we can export the audio, export the video, and use the video on our YouTube channel as well. I will say that the YouTube channel, it doesn't drive much traffic. It doesn't get a lot of search volume on YouTube. And I think the reason is because we're so hyper niche. Like it's not just careers and it's not just study abroad. It's like careers in study abroad. And I think another element is that because our audience for Inside Study Abroad tends to skew older as well as academic, it's sort of the academic world, they're more likely to listen to a podcast versus watch a YouTube video. And so I think most people prefer when we share our content, they're going to go to our blog post with the podcast embed versus YouTube. That's just my assumption. I don't know that that's true, but I just know that our numbers on the podcast downloads keep going up, whereas the YouTube stays stagnant. So we'll get like 2,000 downloads for a podcast episode on our podcast feed, and we'll get like 35 views on YouTube. So that's where I'm like, I don't know if YouTube is a great fit for my industry, my niche, and my target audience. Whereas my target audience for Brazenist, which are people who want to build an online business, build an authority brand around their knowledge, skills, and experience, and who want to travel the world on their own terms. And I know that there's a lot of those people hanging out here on YouTube. I know people are following travel vloggers and van life people and digital nomads and all those things. I know people are following business accounts and grow your business, grow your social media, grow your audience, grow your brand type of accounts. And so I know that the convergence of those people could find me here on YouTube. And the reason I decided to also do this as a video podcast is because I know that the devil is in the details when it comes to building a business. I want to draw people in who are ready to actually truly get down to the brass tacks and true elements of what it takes to build a business. I don't want to be the girl who's like 3 tips to grow your Instagram or whatever with hashtags or something. You know, you get your 9-minute video and I give you these little hacks and then you move on with your life. I know that hacking Instagram is not a key driver for most people's businesses. There are a lot of people talking about it, but it's not necessarily the true key driver for what's going to grow legacy businesses, businesses that truly pay your bills and give you a brazen life that you want to live. I don't want to talk about the cutesy little hacks. I want to get down to like the real granular stuff you need to know about business. And sometimes that involves me telling stories about my own experience or telling stories of other businesses who've done some interesting things. That means longer form content. If I'm going to get down to the granular level of things and give you great context for what I teach, then that takes longer format. I know I'm kind of breaking the rules a little bit here with the YouTube channel, but I know that it's going to draw in the people who truly do want to learn the real foundational principles necessary to build a business. And for those of you listening to a podcast, it just gives you another medium. So if you're like, I like watching the YouTube, but I also want to go for a walk and I want to listen to the next episode. So there's people who are going to prefer just the podcast experience versus people who are like, I got to watch every video. That's my jam. So I'm getting discovered through YouTube search, and it's likely that people are going to discover it here, learn that there's a podcast feed, and then also go subscribe to the podcast as well. That's the hope. We'll see. We shall see. I'm just getting started around here. The other thing I'm doing is I'm actually bringing back interviews to the podcast as well. So I want to bring interviews into the Brazenist ecosystem, just like I've done over on Inside Study Abroad. And I know also that's going to help with discoverability, like we've talked about. I'm going to do something similar. I'm still going to use the audio, obviously, for the podcast, but I'm also going to take the video version of those interviews and post them to the Brazenist YouTube channel. So I'm going to keep that separate from my YouTube channel, and I'm just going to post the video versions of those interviews there. We'll see. I'm going to see how it goes. I'm not sure how it's going to play out. I like the idea of keeping the interviews in its own ecosystem, and then where I'm just talking to camera and I'm teaching you something, doing tech tutorials, things like that, it's all here on this channel, along with my vlogs and travel adventures that I'll be showing in the future again when I'm traveling, hopefully soon. I'm also going to be doing tech tutorials and other types of videos that are going to require a visual element. So for instance, I want to show you my office tour, my setup, my tech setup that's a hybrid between work from home, classic setup, but also how I convert my home office to a digital nomad setup. I basically take this whole situation and use it on the road. And that's just a very visual experience that won't be posted on the podcast feed. Sorry, podcast listeners. That'll only be on the YouTube channel. So that is the status of all of the content, my discovery drivers for my two businesses right now. I'd love to know what you think about it. Are you surprised about some of the pros and cons of each of the platforms? And if you are trying to decide between a podcast and YouTube, which one are you leaning towards now? I would love to know down in the comments. And of course, if you're listening to the podcast, please leave me a rating and review and let me know in that review if you're sold and you're ready to start your own podcast, you're ready to start a YouTube channel. Let me know. I'd love to support you and cheer you on with your own content creation journey. Now you know the pros and cons of YouTube versus podcast for sharing content for your online business. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and remember that every day you postpone a dream, you weaken it a little, so get out there and make some magic happen. Cheers. We shall see. I'm just getting started around here. Woo, woo. All right.